The first storm of that winter came earlier than anyone expected. The forecast said a light flurry, but by the time I reached the old farmhouse that night, the sky had already closed in, heavy and gray, pressing down on the fields until the horizon disappeared. The tires slipped a few times on the frozen road. When I finally pulled into the long driveway, the wind was already cutting through the air, carrying that high-pitched sound that makes you feel like the world's gone hollow. I hadn't been back there in years. The place belonged to my parents, and I'd grown up with the same creaking floors and the same old smells of hay, oil, and wood smoke. After my dad's hip surgery, he couldn't do much around the property, and Mom didn't like being alone. I told myself I'd stay through Christmas, maybe longer if the road stayed bad. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of pine and something faintly metallic. Mom hugged me so tight it hurt, but Dad just nodded from his chair near the stove. His hands were wrapped in an old blanket. He looked smaller than I remembered, his skin pale, his eyes sunken. The radio hummed low beside him, weather warnings every hour. The first 2 days weren't bad. We chopped wood, fixed a few windows, and made sure the barn doors could hold against the snow. My little sister Anna came over after work from the next town. She was always the one who laughed too loud, the one who tried to lighten things up. But that night she looked tired and distracted. She said she'd heard coyotes in the distance on her drive over, said it sounded like they were right behind the car. By the third night, the wind picked up. You could feel it pressing on the walls, pushing through the tiny cracks in the old siding. Every so often, a low vibration came through the floorboards, like the ground itself was groaning. Dad said it was just the cold expanding the wood, but Mom kept glancing toward the windows, like she expected to see someone out there. The barn was my job. I checked it every evening, made sure the horses were fed, and made sure the latch was held. That night, the snow came sideways, stinging my face as I crossed the yard. I remember how the barn light flickered, and for a moment, everything went black, except for the white blur of the storm. Then it came back on, weak and yellow, and I thought I saw movement up in the hayloft, just a shadow sliding past the railing. I called out, thinking it might be one of the cats. No answer. Only the rattle of loose boards and the soft thump of snow hitting the roof. The horses shifted nervously. Their breath came out in thick clouds, the smell of damp straw filling the air. I climbed halfway up the ladder and looked around. Nothing, just a few patches of disturbed hay. But the light from below didn't quite reach the far corner. It felt darker than it should have been, like the shadows had weight. When I went back inside, Mom was waiting near the door. She asked if I'd heard it too. I said, "Heard what?" And she just shook her head, muttering that the wind carried more than cold this time of year. Dad told her to stop scaring everyone, but she wouldn't look away from the window. The next morning, we found one of the goats dead, no tracks around it, just blood frozen on the snow, the body torn open cleanly, as if by blades. Dad said it had probably gotten caught on barbed wire before freezing, but the fence was untouched. Anna wouldn't go near it. She said the eyes were still open. By noon, the storm turned fierce. You couldn't see more than a few feet past the porch. The radio said it was the worst blizzard in 10 years. Power lines started going down in neighboring counties. We filled buckets with snow to melt for water and tried to keep the fire burning high. That night, I heard tapping on the window above my bed. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. When I looked, all I saw was my own reflection, faint and ghost-colored in the glass. I told myself it was just branches, though there weren't any trees close enough. I lay back down, but a few minutes later, I heard something else. A low moan, drawn out, fading with the wind. It sounded almost human. I went downstairs with a flashlight in hand. The beam caught dust floating in the air, swirling with every draft. Dad was asleep in his chair. Mom was standing by the back door, whispering to herself, hands clenched tight around her rosary. When she saw me, she asked if I'd locked the barn. I said yes. She didn't believe me. She told me the wind had been calling our names. I laughed it off, but she didn't smile. The next morning, the snow was piled so high against the windows that daylight barely got through. The radio was dead. So were the phones. We were cut off completely. I spent most of the day shoveling a path to the barn, though it felt pointless. The drifts closed again within minutes. Inside, everything looked the same, except the ladder to the hayloft had fresh marks on it, deep scratches like from metal or bone. The horses refused to eat. They kept facing the same corner, their ears flat, nostrils flaring. That evening, I told Dad something was wrong. He brushed it off, said isolation makes people imagine things. But when the fire started to burn low, he finally looked at me and asked if I'd heard it too. Heard what? I asked. He stared at the stove for a long time before saying, the voice that doesn't belong to anyone in this house. We slept in shifts after that, or tried to. Around midnight, I woke up to a noise upstairs, slow footsteps moving from room to room. I thought maybe Anna was up, but when I checked, she was in her bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Do you hear it? She whispered. I did. The steps stopped right above us, then a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I went up with the flashlight. The hallway was freezing, my breath hanging in front of me. The air smelled faintly of earth and iron. In my old bedroom, the window was wide open. Snow had blown halfway across the floor. I closed it fast, but there were no footprints. Just a single handprint on the glass. Long fingers, wider than mine. I barely slept the rest of that night. When dawn came, the temperature dropped even more. We tried to start the generator, but the fuel line had frozen solid. Anna found the pantry door open, food scattered on the floor like something had clawed through the cans. No one admitted to doing it. That afternoon, I caught Mom outside, kneeling in the snow without her coat, her hands buried in the drift. She was murmuring something under her breath. When I pulled her inside, she looked at me with this strange, empty expression. It's hungry, she said. It's been a long time. She wouldn't say what she meant. Dad told me to keep her upstairs and not let her near the barn again. But by nightfall, she was gone. The door to the yard stood wide open, snow sweeping in over the threshold. I followed the tracks as far as I could. They went straight to the barn and stopped. Not faded or covered, stopped. Like she'd stepped into the air and vanished. The horses were gone too. Only the smell of wet straw and something rotten remained. When I climbed to the hayloft, I saw where the bales had been pushed aside. There was a hollow space behind them, a kind of pit in the wooden floor, and in the pit, something glimmered under the frost. I thought it was ice, but when I leaned closer, I realized it was bone. Thin, brittle, almost powder white. A half-buried shape in the hay. Then came the sound. Not loud, not sudden. Just a long, low exhale, rising from the dark like air escaping from lungs that had been waiting too long. I turned my light toward it, but there was nothing there. Only the beam catching dust and frost. Still, I could feel it watching, just out of reach. I ran back inside, locked the doors, and nailed boards over the windows. Dad didn't ask what I'd seen, but he knew. He kept stoking the fire, eyes on the flames. Anna sat by the stairs, humming under her breath. Her lips were cracked, bleeding slightly, but she didn't seem to notice. Hours passed. The wind screamed against the walls, and every so often I heard that dragging noise again. Only this time it came from the roof. Something moving slowly across the shingles, circling the house. Then silence. Then a single thud, like it had dropped back into the snow. When I looked out the front window, the world was a blur of white and gray. But through the storm, I thought I saw shapes moving. Not people, not animals, just figures bending and twisting with the wind. Almost part of it. I blinked and they were gone. By morning, the temperature had dropped so low that the nails in the walls began to frost over. My breath froze in my beard. We tried to light more fires, but the smoke wouldn't rise. It hung in the room like fog. Dad said we should check the chimney, so we opened the flue, and a wave of cold air poured through the room, carrying a smell that turned my stomach. Sweet, decayed, like meat left out too long. Anna started coughing, then laughing, then crying all at once. She said she dreamed of something whispering through the floorboards, asking her to open the door. Dad shouted at her to stop, but she kept laughing until her voice cracked. That was when I knew something in that house had changed. The walls felt thinner, the air heavier. Every sound stretched longer than it should have, as if time itself was dragging. That night I couldn't take it anymore. I put on my coat, grabbed the lantern, and went back to the barn. I told myself I needed to know what was up there, what we were really hearing. The wind hit so hard I could barely stay upright. The snow came down in blinding sheets. When I reached the barn, the doors swung open by themselves, banging against the walls. Inside, the lantern light flickered, shadows jumping across the beams. The pit in the hayloft was deeper now. The bones were gone. But the air was warm, too warm, like something breathing beneath the floor. I leaned over, trying to see, and the boards creaked under my boots. Then from behind me, I heard my mother's voice.
Calm, familiar.
She said my name the way she used to when I was little. I turned around, but the loft was empty. I called out. Nothing. I could still smell her perfume, though, faint, almost covered by the scent of rot. That's when the boards gave way. I fell through the floor into the dark, landed hard on my side. The lantern shattered, plunging everything into blackness. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I heard movement, slow and steady, circling me. I reached out and touched something rough, like bark, but it was warm, wet. It shifted under my hand. I scrambled back, fumbling for the broken lantern glass. My fingers found bone instead. Small, human, and somewhere in that blackness, a low growl rose, deep, hollow, and close enough to feel in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear movement under the floorboards, like something heavy dragging itself along the frozen dirt beneath the house. The wind outside had quieted down, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind that presses on your chest, like the air's too thick to breathe. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of the front door rattling again. Just a little this time, not like before. More careful. I got up, half expecting to see the latch shaking, but everything was still. I told myself it was just the cold, the way wood shrinks and shifts in the freeze. That's what I told myself. I made coffee on the stove, what little propane I had left, and sat by the window. The world outside was a blank page. The snow had swallowed everything. Fence posts, the barn, the road, even the sky. It all blended together in one flat, endless white. But then there, off by the tree line, I saw something move. Just a flicker, a shape maybe. At first I thought it was an animal, but it was standing too tall. It stayed there for a long while, like it was waiting for something. When I blinked, it was gone. I remember laughing a little, the kind of laugh you give when you're not sure if you're losing it. I said to myself, it's just the snow playing tricks again. I didn't know then that I was already being watched. By evening, I noticed the generator had stopped. It ran fine that morning, but now it wouldn't even cough. The air inside the house was getting colder by the hour, so I threw on everything I could find, blankets, coats, whatever, and started burning the old wood from the porch. Anything to keep warm. That's when I found the prints. They started by the barn, deep and sharp in the snow, and went all the way toward the house. But they weren't boot prints, and they weren't paw prints either. Each one looked like a hand, long fingers pressed deep into the drifts, dragging something behind them. I stood there staring at them until my eyes watered from the cold. They led straight up to the porch, and then, nothing. They stopped. No sign of turning back, no melting snow, no disturbed ice. Just gone. I went back inside and bolted the door again. Every lock, every window latch. That night, I heard the floor creak in the hallway, slowly. One board at a time. I tried to call out, say something, but the words caught in my throat. All I could do was listen. It stopped outside my room. The air turned heavy, and I swear for a second, I could smell something faintly metallic, like cold iron or rust. Then came the softest sound, breathing. Not my own. It was shallow, raspy, like whoever or whatever was there and hadn't breathed fresh air in a long, long time. When I finally managed to move, I flicked on the flashlight and shone it at the door. Nothing. Just the same old hallway with the wallpaper curling from damp. I didn't sleep after that either. By morning, the storm had cleared. The world looked untouched, like the night hadn't happened. I even thought about hiking to the neighbor's place down the road, but my truck was buried, and I didn't have the strength to dig it out. That's when I noticed the smell again. Stronger this time. It wasn't rust. It was something sour, like old meat left too long in the cold. It was coming from the basement. Now look, I'm not stupid. I knew better than to go down there. Every part of me screamed to stay put. But when you're alone long enough, the quiet starts to do strange things to your head. It makes curiosity feel like courage. So I took the flashlight and opened the door. The air that came out was colder than outside. It hit me in the face and carried that smell, thick and heavy. The stairs groaned with every step. The beam of light bounced over boxes, tools, old furniture, under sheets. Everything looked normal, until it didn't. At the far end of the basement, I saw the dirt floor looking wet. I thought maybe a pipe had burst, but when I got closer, I saw it wasn't water. It was darker, almost black, soaking through the soil. I crouched down, reached out a little with the light, and there it was. Something buried, something with skin. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat just locked up. It wasn't a body, not a full one anyway, just parts, a shoulder maybe, or what used to be one. But the worst part wasn't that it was there. It was that it looked fresh. When I stumbled back up the stairs, I slammed the door behind me and pushed the heavy dresser in front of it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, listening for any sound from below. There wasn't any, just silence again. That was the day I stopped thinking it was all in my head. Later, I found something strange on the table by the window. My old Polaroid camera, the one I hadn't touched in years, was sitting there, facing the snow outside. I didn't remember putting it there. There was a single photo sitting beside it, freshly developed. It showed the window, same as the one I was standing at. But in the photo, there was a figure standing in the snow, right where I'd seen that shape the day before. And it wasn't just standing there, it was facing the camera. I flipped the photo over, and there, written in my handwriting, was a date, January 5th, 1984. Only it was January 8th. That's when I started to think maybe time didn't work right out here anymore. Maybe it hadn't since the storm began. After that, I stopped trying to make sense of it. Days started blending together. I'd wake up in different rooms. Lights on when I knew I'd turned them off. Doors open that I'd locked. My reflection in the mirror looked a little less like me each time. Eyes darker, skin paler, lips cracked like I'd been outside too long. And then I started hearing the voices. Not from the wind, not from outside, from the walls. Sometimes they were soft, like someone humming. Other times they'd get clearer, saying things I almost recognized. My name, maybe, or something that sounded close to it. Once I swear I heard my mother's voice. She's been gone for years, but I heard her clear as day, calling me from the hallway. I knew it wasn't her. I knew it couldn't be, but I still opened the door. The hallway was empty except for footprints, bare, wet footprints, leading toward the kitchen. That's where I found the window open, frost crawling across the glass like veins. The snow outside was untouched again, except for one long trail leading away from the house, toward the woods. I don't remember deciding to follow it. I just remember the cold biting through everything I wore and the air burning in my lungs. The trail wound through the trees, down to the creek, and stopped by the old pump shed. The door was open. Inside, I found the second Polaroid, same as before. This one showed me, standing at the shed door looking inside. I hadn't been there before, not until that moment, but the picture had been taken already. That's when I dropped the camera and ran. I don't know how long I was out there. When I finally made it back, the sun was setting, or maybe it was rising. I couldn't tell anymore. My skin was numb, my fingers purple. I slammed the door shut, and this time I nailed the damn thing closed. But that night, I heard the nails pulling out, one by one. I don't remember what happened after that. Not clearly. There are flashes, shadows moving through the house, the sound of something crawling in the walls, the smell of frost and blood. I think I passed out. When I came to, it was morning again. The light was soft, the air still. Everything looked normal. The basement door was open, the dresser pushed aside, and there on the floor beside it was another Polaroid. It showed me, sleeping, taken from the foot of my bed. I don't know how I made it through the next day. Maybe I didn't. Maybe that's when I really lost it. I remember packing a bag, grabbing the keys, digging the truck out with my bare hands. I just wanted to get out, to drive until the snow ended. The road was half buried, the wind picking up again, but I drove anyway, mile after mile, until the gas light came on. That's when I saw the sign, "Welcome to Coldwater Township." Only, that's where I'd started. I'd been driving in circles. There's a part of me that thinks I never left that house, that I'm still there, sitting by the window, waiting for the storm to break. Sometimes when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear footsteps outside, a slow drag, a pause, then another. And when I look through the frost on the glass, I can just barely make out a figure standing by the tree line, still waiting, still watching. I think it wants me to remember, or maybe it just wants me to finish what it started, because sometimes when I close my eyes, I see another photo developing in the dark. This one's not of me. It's of you! Have you ever noticed how quiet snow can get when it's too cold to fall properly? It doesn't float down soft, it just drifts like ash, dry and aimless, and the air itself starts to feel solid. That's how it was the week the blizzard came through our part of Minnesota. The radio said the front would stall for a few days, but it never really stopped. It built walls around the farm until we were just a dot in a sea of white. It was supposed to be manageable. We've had winters worse than that. I stacked the firewood early, sealed the cracks, and checked the generator twice. I wasn't worried. The first 2 days felt almost cozy, the kind of cold that makes you talk louder inside just to hear a voice. My wife Erin baked bread to keep warm, and our boy Nate kept complaining that the Wi-Fi was gone. You could hear the wind slide across the roof like sandpaper. It was just us, the stove, and the hum of the old farmhouse creaking against the cold. By the third day, the drifts were up to the windowsills, and I started checking on the neighbors by radio. Most of the folks on this stretch keep their sets on Channel 5. Old habit, a few crackled in, mostly small talk, reassurance, "We're fine," that kind of thing. But one voice came through rough and close, like the mic was pressed right to his lips. That was Dale from 2 farms over. He said he'd lost power and his generator wouldn't kick. He sounded off, jittery. I told him to stay put till morning, but he just said, "Don't come out here tonight." Then the line went dead. That stuck with me longer than it should have. The next morning, visibility was maybe 5 feet. Still, I bundled up and went outside to clear the vent pipes. The snow hit my face like needles. Somewhere in the whiteout, I thought I heard a hammering sound, metal on wood. But it could have been the wind shaking the barn doors. You start imagining things when all you see is moving white. Inside, Erin said she'd been hearing something too. Not hammering, more like tapping, she said, up near the attic. I laughed it off. The roof beams shift, that's all. But later that night, lying in bed, I caught it myself. A faint, irregular tick, like ice cracking on glass. We both froze. Then nothing. Just the wind again. Day 5, the snow finally eased a bit. I tried the radio again, only static. The generator outside had choked once overnight, and I had to dig through a waist-high drift to restart it. My hand stuck to the metal even through the gloves. That's when I noticed the icicles. They formed thick and long under the eaves, some nearly 4 feet. One of them had fused to the window frame, a clear spear catching what little light there was. It was beautiful in a way. I remember thinking how something that cold could look alive. Around noon, I saw movement by the tree line. A dark figure, slow, deliberate. I thought maybe it was Dale. I opened the door to shout, but the wind swallowed my voice. The figure didn't turn, just kept walking parallel to the fence, disappearing into the white. Erin said maybe it was a deer. I wanted to believe that. The radio came back that evening, only briefly. This time it was Martha from the Jensen place. Her voice was trembling. She said someone was walking around their barn after dark, leaving footprints that circled but never led away. She asked if we'd had any trouble. Before I could answer, the line fizzled out. That night, the tapping started again, louder. I climbed up to the attic with a flashlight. Dust, boxes, insulation, all still. But near the window, frost had pushed inward, curling along the frame. One of those big icicles had punched through a loose pane and was hanging halfway inside, dripping onto the floorboards. Each drop hits with that sharp ticking sound. I almost laughed with relief. That was our culprit, just melting ice. I chipped it away with a broom handle and went back down. But the relief didn't last. The next morning, Erin woke me before dawn. She said she saw light flashing out near the barn, like someone swinging a lantern. I went out again. I shouldn't have, but I did. The snow had hardened overnight, crunching under my boots. The wind burned my face raw. When I reached the barn doors, I saw what she'd meant. A lantern lay in the snow, still lit but half buried, glass fogged. It wasn't ours. Inside, the animals were restless, stamping, snorting. The mare had kicked the stall wall hard enough to bleed, and above me on the crossbeam, another icicle hung down, thick as a wrist. It wasn't there yesterday. I stared at it too long, probably, mesmerized by how it swayed even though there was no draft. Then something behind me groaned, and I spun around. Nothing. Just the smell of hay and cold air leaking through the wood. Back at the house, Erin was pacing. Nate kept asking if school would call off next week, like he didn't understand how bad it was. I tried the radio again. Dead. The generator sputtered. I started calculating supplies in my head. How many gallons of fuel, how many logs left, how long we could stretch the canned food. The snow outside had sealed the lower doors. We were boxed in. Later that afternoon, we heard shouting, muffled, distant, like someone yelling through a scarf. I ran to the window but saw only white. Then a thud, something heavy hitting the porch. I opened the door an inch against the wind. A shape collapsed on the steps, wrapped in a parka crusted with ice. It was Dale. He was barely conscious, face gray with frostbite. We dragged him in, stripped off the coat, and sat him by the stove. His hands were a mess, fingers blackened, cracked. He wouldn't look at me. Just kept muttering, "Don't trust them. Don't trust anyone out there." I asked who he meant. He stared past me like he hadn't heard. We gave him soup and warm blankets. After a while, he started shaking, not from the cold, more like nerves. He said people were turning on each other over at his end. Claimed the Jensen boy went missing, and when they went looking, they found footprints leading right up to their window. He kept saying, "It's the cold. It's doing something to them." Erin tried to calm him, but every sound outside made him flinch. That night, he refused to sleep in the spare room. He said the house didn't feel right, ended up sitting by the kitchen table with a flashlight in hand. Around midnight, I heard him whispering. I got up, thinking he was on the radio, but the radio wasn't even on. He was staring at the window instead. The frost had built up thick enough that you couldn't see through it, but he was focused on it like something was moving behind the glass. When I touched his shoulder, he jolted so hard the chair toppled. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, breathing fast, eyes wide. I told him to rest. He said, "If you see them outside, don't let them in." Then he shut his eyes tight, still clutching the flashlight. By morning, he was gone. The back door was cracked open, snow piled inside. I followed his tracks maybe 20 yards before they vanished into windswept drifts. We called his name till our throats hurt. Nothing, just the wind. Erin wanted to lock every door. I told her Dale probably wandered back toward his farm once the weather cleared a bit, though I didn't believe it myself. We argued. Nate started crying. The walls felt smaller every hour. That evening, while I was stoking the stove, Erin said she saw something again, out by the barn roof, a shimmer like glass catching light. I looked and there it was, the same icicle that had broken into the attic window, or one just like it, only longer now, curved downward like it was reaching. I told her it was nothing, just weather, but I felt a cold knot in my gut that wouldn't leave. That's when the tapping started again, this time from inside the walls. The tapping wouldn't stop. It was softer now, irregular, like a loose pipe shifting in the cold, but it moved. Every few minutes, it would slide along the wall, pause, then start again a few feet over. I tried to trace it once, followed the sound from the kitchen to the hallway to the stairwell, but it always stayed just out of reach. When I pressed my ear against the wood, the boards felt colder than the air around them. Erin didn't want me touching the walls anymore. She said the sound got louder when I did. I thought she was imagining it, but after a while I started noticing it too, like the house was listening. The wind outside had dropped a bit, yet somehow the air inside still hummed, a low vibration in the glass. I tried turning up the radio static just to drown it out. By then we were running low on kerosene. The generator coughed all night, spitting fumes that made my eyes burn. I kept the stove going, burning even the small scrap wood I'd saved for repairs. Nate had stopped talking much. He'd sit near the window, scratching shapes into the frost. Circles mostly, always overlapping. On the 7th morning I found something outside, not far from the porch, half buried, frozen solid. At first I thought it was just drifted debris, but when I dug at it I realized it was Dale's flashlight. The lens was cracked, the switch stuck halfway on. I brought it inside and set it on the counter. Aaron stared at it for a long time before asking if I saw anything else. I lied and said no. The next day, Martha's husband made it through on the radio for a moment. His voice was faint, broken by static. He said they'd found someone on their property, face down in the snow, coat torn, frozen so hard they couldn't move him. Then the line cut off again. Aaron started pacing, muttering about getting the truck started, just driving until we hit another town. I told her the road was gone, buried, that we wouldn't make it half a mile. She didn't answer. Just stared out the window where the icicles hung. They'd grown thicker overnight, curving under their own weight. One had snapped and driven straight through the sill. The point was buried deep into the wood like a blade. That night, Nate said he heard voices outside. I told him it was the wind again, but he shook his head. He said they were calling names, ours. I sat with him by the stove until he fell asleep. I didn't hear anything at first, but sometime after midnight, when the house was dead quiet, I caught it. Faint, stretched by distance, but there, a voice calling. Tom. My name. I went to the door, pressed my face to the frost. Nothing. Then again a little closer. Tom. It sounded like Dale. I woke Erin, told her to stay put, and grabbed the flashlight. The second I opened the door, the cold slammed into me like a wall. My breath fogged so thick I could barely see the beam. I called out, Dale? The snow muffled everything. Then, maybe 10 yards out, I saw a shape standing just beyond the porch light, still upright. I raised the flashlight, but the lens flickered. Weak. The shape didn't move. I stepped forward once, twice. The ice underfoot cracked loudly. The shape leaned slightly like wind was pushing it, but the air was dead still. I took one more step, and the light caught its face, or what was left of it. Frozen, eyes glazed, skin stretched white. It was Dale. His coat is stiff, his arms hanging straight at his sides. I stumbled back toward the door, heart pounding. The flashlight slipped from my hand, beam slicing upward. That's when I saw it, above the porch, an icicle hanging longer than the rest. Thin but sharp as a dagger, vibrating gently as if it were alive. A single drop of water slid from the tip and froze midair before it hit the steps. I shut the door and bolted it. Aaron asked what happened. I couldn't speak. Nate started crying again, asking if Dale was coming in. I said no. The next morning the body was gone, just smooth snow where it had stood. Aaron barely looked at me anymore. She stayed in the kitchen, whispering under her breath. I heard her counting once, backward from 10, over and over. Nate kept saying he wanted to go outside. I told him no. He said he saw light under the barn door at night, like someone was moving around in there. I checked once just to prove him wrong, but when I reached the barn I saw tracks. Not footprints, more like drag marks, winding in circles near the wall. Inside, the smell hit me first. The hay was damp and sour. One of the cows had broken its tether. I followed the sound of its breathing, low and wet, to the far corner. It was still alive but standing stiff, head tilted up. Above it, hanging from the rafters, were dozens of small icicles, clear and straight, dripping onto its back. Each drop froze as it touched the hide. The animal didn't even flinch. When I went back to the house, I told Erin we needed to move into town as soon as the storm eased. She didn't answer. Just kept staring at the window. Later that day, the power went out completely. The generator died with a last cough and wouldn't start again. Without the hum, The silence in the house felt huge. That's when the tapping came back. Faster now, and from multiple spots at once. Kitchen wall, hallway, ceiling, like fingers drumming lightly. I grabbed a hammer and started hitting the boards, trying to make it stop. Aaron screamed at me to leave it alone. Then something cracked upstairs. A heavy snap, like timber splitting. I ran up the steps and saw the attic door had been pushed open. Snow drifted down the stairs in a fine mist. I climbed up slowly, heart racing. The window that had been broken before was now wide open. The cold poured in. Hanging from the ceiling beam was another icicle, massive, stretching nearly to the floor. At its tip was a dark shape, something trapped inside the ice. I shined the flashlight closer. It looked like fabric, a piece of cloth. Then I realized it was part of a coat sleeve. I stumbled back and nearly fell down the stairs. Erin was at the bottom, eyes wide, holding Nate close. She asked what I saw. I couldn't answer. That night, none of us slept. The wind picked up again, moaning through the cracks. The temperature dropped hard enough that the windows frosted over from the inside. Erin started to cry quietly, saying she heard footsteps above us. I told her it was ice shifting, but I didn't believe it anymore. Around 3 a.m., the kitchen window shattered. The sound was so sharp it cut through the storm noise. I ran in, and the first thing I saw was the floor, covered in shards of glass and ice. One of the big icicles from the eaves had fallen straight through the pane and buried itself deep into the wooden floorboards, still quivering. Above it, the curtain was torn open, flapping in the wind. Erin screamed for me to close it. I grabbed a chair and yanked the glass out, but as I did, I saw movement outside. Shadows shifting in the snow, slow and human-shaped. 3, maybe 4 of them, all standing just beyond the light. I slammed the boards shut, nailed them with whatever I could find. We huddled by the stove, not speaking. Every few minutes, a thud hit the wall, soft but deliberate. I could hear the ice crack and settle with each impact. By dawn, the noise stopped. The wind, too. For the first time in days, silence. Erin was asleep against the wall, Nate in her arms. I stepped to the window and scraped a small hole in the frost to look outside. The yard was still, snow piled high. But along the porch railing hung dozens of icicles, each one slightly curved, each one with something dark frozen inside. Strands of fabric, bits of wood, maybe even, no, I don't know. I packed what I could, told Erin we were leaving as soon as the light came fully. She didn't move. Her eyes were open but distant, unfocused. I shook her shoulder. She was cold. Not frozen, but cold. Her breath is shallow. I called her name again. Nothing. That's when Nate started whispering. "They're waiting," he said. I asked who. He pointed toward the window. I didn't look. I couldn't. When I finally stepped outside, the air was still, heavy. Every step crunched like glass breaking. The icicles lining the roof trembled slightly, as if reacting to the sound. I made it as far as the truck before I realized I'd forgotten the keys. I turned back, and that's when one of the icicles above the porch broke loose. It fell so fast I barely saw it, just a flash of light. It hit the snow upright, inches from my boot, buried deep. I stared at it for a long time. The thing was clear as glass, but at its core was a dark streak twisting up the center. I reached down without thinking, ran my gloved hand along it. The cold bit straight through the leather, and for a second I swear I felt it pulse. I left it there, got in the truck, drove until I hit a road that looked plowed, found a gas station with lights still on, maybe 20 miles out. The guy behind the counter asked where I'd come from. When I told him, he stopped smiling, said the highway had been closed for a week, that the plows found nothing but drifted snow and a collapsed farmhouse at that location. I told him that wasn't possible. I just left there. He didn't argue, just handed me coffee and said, "You should warm up." I never went back. The house, the land, it's all gone now under new snow. But sometimes when the temperature drops and I hear the ice shift on the roof, I think about that last look out the window, those shapes in the snow, and I wonder how many of them were ever really people. Because I still dream of that icicle, the one that nearly hit me. And I keep remembering the feeling when I touched it, that faint, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. And every winter since, when the first freeze comes, I find new icicles on my porch. Always one a little longer than the rest, no? Always one with something dark trapped inside. It's strange what you remember after something like that. Not the big things like the screaming or the frostbite or the smell of burnt fabric, but the small ones. The way the firelight used to dance across the ceiling when we still had enough wood. The way you could almost forget how cold it really was when you stared into it long enough. It made the room look alive, almost warm. That was before the wood ran out, before the house stopped breathing. It started like any other storm. Out here in northern Minnesota, snow isn't news. It's just a fact of life. We knew how to handle it. My wife Claire used to joke that we had a PhD in winter. I'd go chop wood while she'd double seal the windows and keep the kids, Eli and Grace, busy with cocoa and old board games. But this storm wasn't like the others. It didn't blow in. It settled. The clouds just sank, slow and heavy, until the world looked like wet chalk. The wind never screamed. It moaned, and it didn't stop for days. The first 2 days were fine. We were snowed in, but we had food, plenty of wood, and the generator kept the fridge humming. The radio said the main roads were closed, but help would be out once it cleared. I remember Claire making stew that night. We laughed. She said it felt like a camping trip, just with better insulation. By the third night, the woodpile outside was buried. I tried digging it out in the morning, but the door froze shut overnight. I had to break it open with my shoulder, and even then the drift outside came up to my waist. I've seen bad snow before, but this was like being swallowed. Still, I told myself it would pass. It always did. On day 4, the generator choked. The fuel line must have frozen. Without it, the house went quiet. No hum, no background noise, just the kind of silence that presses against your ears. We burned through the last of the split logs that night. I told the kids not to worry, that we still had furniture to break down if we needed to. Claire didn't like that, said the house was our shelter. Burning pieces of it felt wrong. But by day 5, wrong didn't mean much. The air inside had teeth, the kind that bit at your fingers and crawled down your throat when you tried to sleep. We started with the chairs, then the banister. It's amazing how quickly you stop caring about what something looks like once you realize warmth has a price. On the 6th day, the kids stopped playing. They just sat near the hearth, watching the flames like it was a window to something else. Grace asked me if the fire could die. I told her no, not if we kept feeding it. I lied. By day 7, the firewood was gone, and the furniture was almost all ash. The temperature inside had dropped to the point where our breath hung in the air like ghosts. I took apart the shelves next. Claire stopped talking much after that. She'd just sit by the fireplace, rocking back and forth with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at nothing. The kids started asking when the snow would stop. I didn't have an answer anymore. The radio was dead, the phone lines were down, and the light from the windows looked more like frost than sun. We stopped opening the curtains because it only made it feel colder. By day 9, the hunger hit. The canned food was gone. The bread had gone hard and green. I tried melting snow for water, but even that took forever without real heat. My hands were cracked and bleeding from the cold, and every time I looked at them, they didn't even feel like mine. That night, we burned the table. It lasted maybe 2 hours. After that, there was nothing left to burn but the floorboards, and that's when the argument started. I told Claire we'd have to tear up the planks near the entryway. It was the only wood left that was dry enough to burn. She said no, said it would break the seal and let the cold in. We yelled for the first time since the storm began. The kids cried. I remember her eyes, the way she looked at me, like I wasn't her husband anymore, just another mouth to feed. I tried to keep it together, tried to remind them we'd make it, that help would come. But every time the wind howled against the house, I felt it in my chest. Like the storm wasn't outside anymore, like it had already gotten in. By the 10th day, Grace wouldn't get out of bed. Eli started coughing, this deep, dry sound that didn't belong in a kid's lungs. Claire blamed me for not rationing right, for not fixing the generator sooner. She wasn't wrong, but there was nothing left to fix. The fire had gone out sometime in the night. I woke up to the sound of ice cracking under the window and saw my breath rolling out in thick waves. Claire was sitting in front of the empty hearth, just staring into the blackened bricks. She said she could still feel the heat. I wanted to believe her. That's when I started thinking about the barn. I'd locked it up before the storm, and maybe, just maybe, there was still some wood stored near the tool shed. If I could dig my way through, maybe I could bring enough back to start one last fire. One real fire. So I told her I was going. She didn't even look up, just said, "If you go out there, don't come back without something to burn." I bundled up in every layer I could find. My hands were too stiff for gloves, so I wrapped them in towels. I pushed the door open, and it was like stepping into another world. Gray sky, gray snow, no line between them. I made it halfway to the barn before the wind knocked me off my feet. The snow was waist deep, and my legs burned just from moving. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but I knew the way. Or I thought I did. When I finally reached it, the barn was frozen solid. The latch had iced over. I had to use my boot to kick it open. The inside was empty. No animals, no tools, no wood. Just the smell of cold metal and rot. That's when I realized something else. The wind wasn't blowing the door shut. It was pulling it open. I froze right there in the barn doorway, trying to make sense of what I just felt. That wind, it wasn't just strong, it pulled. Like the cold itself was breathing in, trying to drag the whole world down its throat. For a second, I thought maybe it was just pressure, air movement, whatever. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter what caused it. What mattered was that the barn was empty. Every scrap of wood, gone. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the floor. The snow had crept in through the cracks and covered everything. I kicked around in it, desperate, digging with my hands, my sleeves soaking through until my fingers went numb. Nothing. No boards, no crates, no kindling. There was a moment right before I turned to leave where I actually thought about lying down in that snow, just stopping, letting it all fade out quiet. No more shivering, no more guilt, no more watching the kids drift in and out of sleep while the house died around us. Just peace, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was the thought of their faces. Maybe I was just too afraid to die cold. When I made it back to the house, my eyelashes were frozen together. Claire met me at the door. She didn't say anything, didn't ask what I'd found, just looked over my shoulder like she'd been waiting to see if I'd come back alone. The look in her eyes, it scared me more than the storm. That night I heard her whispering to herself by the hearth. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was soft, almost pleading. The kind of sound you make when you're trying to convince yourself of something you already know isn't true. The next morning, she told me we couldn't stay inside any longer. Said we needed to find another house, another fire, something. I told her we'd freeze before we got a mile in that wind. She said freezing here would be no different. Then she said something I still can't shake. If the fire's gone, we make our own. She started tearing up what was left of the curtains, the bedding, even Eli's little stuffed bear. Anything that would burn for a few minutes more. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. We lit it, and for a while it worked. The smell was awful, burnt cloth and melted plastic. But the heat, however small, made us believe again. The kids huddled close. Grace even laughed once. It didn't sound right, but it was a sound I'd missed. But the flame went fast. Within an hour, it was just smoke again. And that smoke filled the room like fog, stinging our eyes, sticking to the back of our throats. Eli started coughing again, harder this time, each breath shorter than the last. That's when Claire looked at me and said we'd waited too long. Her voice was calm, too calm. She said, "If we don't do something now, we all die tonight." I asked what she meant, but she didn't answer, just kept staring at the fireplace. It took me a few seconds to realize what she was thinking. The house still had wood underneath us. I told her no, over and over. Told her the floorboards were all that kept the cold out, but she wasn't listening anymore. She grabbed the poker and started prying at the planks by the hearth. The sound was awful, splintering, cracking, like bones breaking. I tried to pull her back, but she shoved me away. The kids started crying again. She managed to rip one board up before I got to her. I told her to stop, Told her we'd find something else. She looked up at me, hair hanging in her face, her lips cracked and white. She said, "We can't eat words, David." That broke something in me. Not anger, not fear, just this hollow space where everything used to be. I sat down beside her and stared at the empty hearth. The fire hadn't just been heat, it had been hope. Once it was gone, the house didn't feel like a house anymore. That night we didn't speak. The only sound was the wind crawling through the holes she'd made. I must have dozed off because I woke to movement. Claire was standing in front of the hearth again, her back to me, holding something close to her chest. I asked her what she was doing. She didn't answer. I got up, and when I stepped closer, I saw what it was. Eli's blanket. She was feeding it into the ashes. Slow, like she was offering it to something. I pulled it out, shouted at her, told her to stop. She screamed back, said I didn't understand, that we couldn't just sit there and wait, that the fire needed something. It wasn't until later that I realized she wasn't talking about warmth anymore. That argument lasted most of the night. I don't remember how it ended. I think she walked out. Or maybe I did. It's all blurred together now. The noise, the cold, the shaking. When morning came, I couldn't find her. Or the kids. The front door was wide open, snow piled inside, the wind carrying faint shapes of voices that didn't belong to anyone anymore. I followed the tracks as far as I could, but they vanished halfway to the tree line. I don't know if she took them to find shelter, or if she just couldn't stand to watch the fire die again. By the time I went back inside, I couldn't feel my feet. The house was silent. The fireplace was nothing but gray dust. I sat down where the fire used to be and waited. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up days later to the sound of snow melting off the roof. The storm had ended. They said they found me half buried near the hearth, delirious, repeating the same thing over and over. I asked them if they could still smell it, the fire, the burnt fabric, the air that tasted like iron. They told me there was no sign of anyone else in the house. No footprints, no bodies, just broken boards and a burned-out hearth. I tried to tell them about the wood running out, about the way the heat had faded day by day until it wasn't the storm we were fighting anymore. It was the quiet, but they just nodded, wrote something down, and told me to rest. I've had time to rest now. Too much time. The skin on my hands still feels like it's cracking, even when it's not cold. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the faint pop of burning wood. And every winter since, whenever the first snow hits the roof, I start stacking wood again. Not just for the fireplace, for the sound, for the memory of it. Because if it goes out again, if the flame dies completely, I don't know what might come crawling back with the cold. If you were trapped in that house, with nothing left to burn but the walls that kept you alive, what would you have done?